Hi, folks, with Taskless today. Taskless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. Call out to all the listeners and viewers who come from the Republic of Ireland. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the not so much the changing nature of education, and I'm going to talk about that, but also the view that anyone under the age of early 40s really has zero comprehension of what the education landscape looked like, before the year 2000 or particularly earlier than that. So, certainly when I was graduating from high school, the university had, and they would post up the courses at the senior high school graduation, the university courses that were available, and there wasn't very many. If there was even 50, I'd be surprised. I think it was quite a bit less than that. Now, there were things like there were the basics: engineering, medicine, law, and there was a few of the classical type subjects. There was history, classical Greek, classical Latin, that sort of stuff. And there also English literature was a course, and there were a few. The humanities were well represented, as indeed were the sciences, but it was all serious areas of study. Now, to get into, there just recently, I think there was a new course that one of the universities added, which caused a bit of a stir, by the way, at the time. There was something like, I think it was called Peace Studies or something like that. And this was a forerunner of the wider expansion of sociology, African American studies, lesbian studies, Latin American lesbian studies, gay studies, and so on and so forth. So that was one of the earlier forerunners of that. And then I remember thinking it was quite comical. And the people that sort of gravitated towards the peace studies were the students that couldn't really pass a proper exam, and they had those funny, those sort of glasses that Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary Trotsky, would have worn, and they had at least long hair and beards and so on. But anyway, this was the less than 50 courses at the university, and they were additional courses in say like masters and PhDs and so on. But the amount of people going to university was, of the kids that started high school, and I've mentioned this many times before, less than 3% of the kids went to university. Of those, more than a third dropped out in the first year. They just couldn't hack it. Now, back in those days, if you flunked a few tests, and particularly if you at the end of the year you didn't make the grade or make the cut, you had to appear before a committee. This is how tough it was back in the day. You had to appear before a committee, and you had to do what was called show cause. So that, what was the causation factors that led you to fail or to flunk the tests and so on. And you had to show cause. Now you had to say, well, look, my mother died, or you had to have something pretty decent. If well, I can't hack the hard work, or I'm not really as smart as I thought I was, or I'm too busy partying and having a good time, that sort of stuff, then they'd say, well, look, buddy, there's the door. You need to get out of it. So the rigor was huge. Now, minorities were particularly vulnerable to that. Not that there was many in those days, because the cut was so high. Say getting into medicine, in the final exam, you had to get sort of 85%. And it was almost an auction system. So they'd have, for example, 1,000 say for example, for medicine, they'd have 1,000 places. And if you happened to be in a year with a lot of bright kids, then the pass mark or the cutoff mark to get into medicine, instead of 85, could be 89, for example. So there was effectively a kind of a quasi-auction system that was going on there as well. So now the grade didn't drop. So if they got, say, a year of lots of weak students where, not many of them made the 85% cut, they wouldn't create more places. Just so it was that rigorous back then, that they would be prepared to go to a higher standard, but not a lower standard. So very few kids went to university. Again, most dropped out. So even meeting someone who had a graduate degree, was actually pretty rare. You could be in the entire office, and you'd be lucky if maybe one or two people had a degree. If you're in a company that, say, was involved in, I don't know, electrical engineering, then you would find electrical engineers there because those are the people that they would hire. But even then, they were the minority. I was in one department of a company there where they had the electrical engineer, he was the design engineer, but nobody. But there's no one else who had an engineering degree in that department. Also, you would have people with, say, the head accountant, and they'd got their diploma from a community college. The idea that you would come across someone who had a degree in finance from university back then, different now, back then was very rare indeed. In fact, I don't think accounting was a subject certainly in Australia until probably 1980 in the universities. Nonetheless, if you talk to someone again in their early 40s today, they can't even conceive of a system of merit. They can't conceive of a situation where you don't have lesbian dance theory as a respected and revered, course of study that the universities will try and promote internationally. You don't have the adverts that you constantly see of a young girl with a whiny victim type voice saying, beat the patriarchy by coming to this university and studying lesbian dance. You didn't get that sort of stuff back then. The education was for the bright kids, and it was rigorous. You passed or failed, and that was it. Now, to even conceptually try and cover this with someone in their, again, younger than their early 40s today, they just stare blankly at it. Can't even comprehend such a landscape of merit and limited courses where only the brightest people can get to do it. For them, they see education as, because it's all around them, they see education as just some sort of, it's just something you do, and it doesn't matter whether you flunk everything, you're still going to get a degree. So they've got very much a participation trophy, and they've also got a certification mentality of you can't possibly know anything about the subject unless you have a certification in it. Only then can you know. No one else could possibly know. So you get the most ridiculous things now, where even to work in a shop, work in some bullshit low-paid retail job out in the outer suburbs, you have to have a diploma to do it. And if you haven't got a diploma, you can't possibly know what to do. And this is increasingly becoming the attitude on education generally. It's a matter of certification, not capability. So capability doesn't exist anymore. Certification does, or a degree does. And it doesn't matter if that degree was acquired non-meritoriously. It doesn't matter whether it was a participation trophy. Nobody cares, but you have that bit of paper, you then are deemed as knowing. Whether you do know or not, it's not relevant. You're deemed as knowing because of the certification process, which of course is affirmative action participation trophy, and that no one's different from anyone else, and so on and so forth. Now, trying to explain to someone, again, under that age, well, there was a time when you actually had to pass the exam, and if you flunked, you couldn't get to university, that there was only 45 courses at university. There was no such thing as lesbian dance theory or African American studies or studying the music of Beyonce or something like that. Those sort of things didn't exist. It was all serious, rigorous courses, and you had to pass. If you weren't passing, you're out. They stare blankly at you. They can't even comprehend such a world. And it indicates, I think, how far education, but how far the Western society has this idea that education was going to be the great leveling equity, and especially Democrats in the United States, or even leftist parties. They always talk, education. But what does education mean? Does it mean that you flunk every exam you ever sit, or everyone gets a participation trophy, or you study lesbian dance theory? I mean, is that education? Is that what they mean by it? The word's bandied around, but this is the idea of creating equal outcomes. If we can force everyone to study lesbian dance theory, then we are now all equal. So the idea of creating an equal world, or an equal outcome world, has represented probably the greatest perversion and subversion of education that could ever possibly be imagined. Has it created the equality, equity, equal outcome nirvana that they were hoping for? Well, no, not even close. Has it lowered the standards to below floor level in order to achieve some sort of starry-eyed goal that was never achievable in the first? Well, yes. The whole education and the whole idea of knowledge and the quality of knowledge has been subverted out of sight, so much so that other than in a few disciplines, it barely exists. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.